I know what you're probably thinking. This is just another story with a crazy title, a clickbait twist, maybe even something exaggerated just to grab your attention. But let me stop you right there. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't some made-up drama or twisted internet creepypasta.
No.
This is real. This happened. And before this video ends, you're going to find out exactly why the police crashed through the front door of our quiet little home, why they came for the woman who swore everything was normal, and how I nearly lost everything because I trusted her. If you've ever felt like something was off in your own house, like a shadow behind the walls of your so-called safe place, then you need to hear this. Because the truth always hides behind normal. And trust me, by the time you get to the end, you'll never look at your partner the same way again. Now let me speak to you directly. Not as some content creator or voice behind a screen, but as someone who's been through something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I want you to really listen.
Because this isn't just about me.
It's about the kind of reality that creeps into your life so quietly, so politely, that you don't even notice you're living in a lie. I know how easy it is to get numb, to scroll, to tune out because everything feels scripted. But this story isn't just another piece of internet fiction. This is personal. This is my home, my wife, my life. And the moment those cops broke down that door, everything I believed in shattered. And I need you to stay with me because I promise you, everything you think is happening, it's not what it seems. That's not paranoia talking. That's experience. You want answers? You'll get them. But you need to see it through. Every single part. Because one missed detail, and you'll never understand what really happened. Let me back up. I guess, on the surface, we were the textbook definition of a calm, middle-class couple. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. White fences, trimmed lawns, friendly hellos from dog-walking neighbors. You know the kind. She was the perfect wife, sweet, organized, always smiling at the right times, always saying the right things. We had dinner together every night. She folded my laundry the way my mother used to. She even surprised me with homemade pie on random Tuesdays. Honestly, people looked at us and thought we were lucky. Normal. But you know how that word starts to rot once you start digging beneath it? Normal. It's just a mask. It's a performance. And the better someone is at performing, the harder it is to believe they're hiding something dark. But she was. She absolutely was. There were signs, tiny, forgettable things at first. Like how she never let me check the mail. Or how she always kept the laundry room locked. She told me she was just organizing and didn't want me to mess up the system. Fair enough. Then there were nights I'd wake up and find the bed empty, only to discover her sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. She said she couldn't sleep, that her mind wandered. And I believed her. Because when you love someone, your mind does the math for them. It fills in the gaps with excuses. Because the alternative is too terrifying. But now I realize those were the cracks in the surface. The house wasn't breaking, it was bleeding, and I didn't see it. You ever get that gut feeling, like something's off but you can't explain it? Like you're living your life with your eyes open but still not seeing clearly? That's how I felt. I remember one afternoon, she was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, and I looked at her, and for the first time, I thought, I don't know this person. I don't know who she really is. I shook it off. Told myself I was being ridiculous. Told myself everyone has weird moments. That I was just tired from work, stressed from bills. But the feeling kept creeping back. Not constantly. Not like a horror movie jump scare. It was slower. Quieter. Like mold behind the wallpaper. You don't smell it right away, but by the time you do, it's everywhere. Then came the phone calls. She'd always leave the room to take them. Her tone would shift, like she wasn't my wife anymore, but someone sharper. More alert. More calculating. When I asked her who it was, she'd laugh. Just work. But here's the thing. She didn't work. Not anymore. She left her job 2 years ago, when we decided to start a family, even though the baby never happened. I started watching her more closely, and it didn't take long before the coincidences started piling up. Unfamiliar cars parked on our street. Locked drawers in her office. Passwords on devices that used to be open. She was hiding something. But what? That question started consuming me. I couldn't focus. I couldn't sleep. I started doing things I'm not proud of. Following her, checking browser histories, listening outside the bathroom door. I know how that sounds. Obsessive. Controlling. But when you live under the same roof as someone who's lying to your face, you start to lose yourself. You start to question your own reality. And then, just when I thought I was going crazy, when I began to doubt myself entirely, the cops showed up. Guns drawn. Tactical gear. Yelling my name. Telling me to put my hands up. Asking me if anyone else was in the house. Asking me if I knew what my wife had done. And that's when I knew. Everything I feared was real. She'd been hiding something from me. And now it wasn't just her secret. It was mine too. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something deeply important. We like to believe we'd see the signs. That we'd know if someone was dangerous or manipulative or hiding a double life.
We think we're smarter than that.
But we're not. We're human. We want love. We crave connection. And we believe what we're told when it's packaged neatly enough. My wife didn't scream at me. She didn't cheat on me, at least not in the usual way. What she did was much worse. And the worst part? She made me love her while doing it. The authorities knew more than I did. They wouldn't even let me back inside the house that night. They kept saying it was active. That it was bigger than I understood. That's when the fear really hit. Because I realized maybe she wasn't the only one lying. Maybe everyone around me, my neighbors, her friends, even the people who showed up in uniform, maybe they all knew something I didn't. And maybe I'd been part of something far more twisted than I could ever imagine. I need you to keep watching. I need you to hold on to the feeling in your chest right now, that tight knot of unease, because that's what I lived with every day. And if you think the story ends with an arrest and a couple of headlines, you're dead wrong.
No.
What the police found inside her home, what they uncovered, changed everything. Not just for me, not just for her, but for everyone who thought they knew what normal looked like. The truth is, it's the people who smile the hardest who are often hiding the most. You're about to see how far one person will go to protect their secret, and how close I came to never making it out alive. In the days leading up to the police raid, everything in our lives looked painfully normal from the outside. I was clocking in and out of my job at a small architecture firm in town, working long hours and zoning out in staff meetings while pretending to care about parking lot layouts and ADA compliance codes. It wasn't exactly my dream, but it paid the mortgage. We had dinner together most nights, sometimes takeout, sometimes one of her immaculate, home-cooked meals that always came with a smile and a glass of wine. She liked to play lo-fi music while we ate, dim the lights just enough to give it that cozy, almost cinematic glow. I'd usually unwind with a beer and scroll through news headlines or random YouTube rabbit holes. From the outside, it was the kind of life people aim for, a peaceful, domestic rhythm. But lately, I had been drowning in this gnawing sensation that something wasn't right, like I was living inside someone else's curated version of happiness. And the deeper I looked, the more distorted everything began to feel, like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. What's strange is that I can't point to one exact moment when it all started falling apart. It was more like a slow leak, a whisper behind a door, a flicker in her eyes, a pause in her voice when she said, "I love you." For a while, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Maybe I was projecting my own restlessness onto her. But then I started catching these tiny inconsistencies, little lies that didn't add up. She told me she was going to visit her sister one weekend, but later I found a gas receipt from a town 2 hours in the opposite direction. She said she was redecorating the basement, but when I checked, nothing had changed. She kept talking about wanting to start fresh, but I didn't know what she meant or who she was trying to start over from. The tension between us grew quietly, like a slow-building storm. We weren't fighting, not really. But we weren't connecting either. I'd catch her staring at her phone with this expression that didn't belong to the woman I married. Like she was listening to someone else's story, responding to someone else's needs. When I asked her about it, she'd smile and say, "Just a recipe I found on Pinterest," or, "It's my friend from the yoga group. You wouldn't know her." But the truth is, I didn't know any of her friends anymore. At some point, she'd stopped inviting them over, stopped mentioning names. And even though I slept next to her every night, I started to feel like I was watching her from behind glass. Close, but unreachable. One night, I went through her phone. I know how that sounds. Invasive. Untrusting. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. And what I found wasn't incriminating at first glance, no flirty texts or strange photos, but it was odd. There were long stretches of deleted call logs, notes with strange sequences of numbers, a contact saved only as L, and then an encrypted app I'd never seen before, one that wouldn't even open without a biometric scan. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I needed more. Something solid. So I started paying attention, listening for patterns, tracking her movements when I could. I even placed a small tracking tile in her car, thinking it would either give me peace of mind or confirmation that my instincts weren't lying. What it gave me instead was confusion. She wasn't going where she said she was. A few times a week, she'd drive to the edge of town and park near an old warehouse complex that had been half condemned for years. She'd stay for hours. Never text. Never answer calls. One time I followed her from a distance, and I saw her enter a back door with a keypad lock. She had the code. Like she'd been there dozens of times before. I stayed parked down the block, engine off, heart pounding. But I didn't go in. I didn't have the nerve. Or maybe I was afraid of what I'd find. I told myself I'd come back later with a reason, with backup. But I never got the chance. Because 3 days later, the cops broke down our front door before sunrise. Now, here's where things get murky. As they cuffed me and searched the house, I kept trying to explain that I didn't know what was going on, that whatever they were looking for had nothing to do with me. They weren't listening. They kept asking about names I'd never heard before. Kept showing me photos of people who looked vaguely familiar, like faces you might pass on a bus, but never speak to. One name that came up more than once was Thomas Avery. I later found out he was a man who disappeared 3 months ago from a town 2 hours away. No known ties to us. No mutual friends. But when they showed me his picture, something about his eyes struck me. And then I remembered. I'd seen him once. Just once. A blurry figure in the background of a photo my wife had shown me, supposedly from a book club gathering. She had cropped it tightly, said it was just a cute snap. But now I was beginning to wonder if that photo was more than a coincidence. And if so, why had she kept it? The detectives were convinced my wife was involved in something illegal. Fraud, maybe. Smuggling, possibly. They weren't even ruling out human trafficking. It sounded absurd, like a bad Netflix thriller. But the more they searched, the more serious they became. They found multiple passports hidden in a hollowed-out book in our home office, none of them in our names. A burner phone tucked into the lining of her gym bag. And files on our shared laptop that had been carefully hidden behind encrypted folders. I told them I had no idea. And they believed me, at least some of them did. But they still wouldn't let me leave. They said I was a witness, a person of interest, and that phrase hit me like a gut punch. Because suddenly, I wasn't just her husband, I was a suspect in whatever double life she had been leading. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. What if I wasn't just a bystander? What if she'd been using me this entire time? What if my name, my job, even our house had been part of the cover? What if I was just one piece in a much larger game? I started going through everything in my head, conversations, gifts, vacations, trying to decode them, trying to figure out what was real and what was planted. And that's when I started remembering the others. The people who had come into our lives briefly and then vanished. Her old coworker, who suddenly moved across the country. A neighbor she got close to and then stopped talking to overnight. The delivery guy she always gave a generous tip to, who then disappeared without a word. Were they just background noise, or had they been part of something bigger? And then, of course, there was the man who kept calling our landline at odd hours and hanging up when I answered. She said it was a telemarketer, but the calls always came after 2 a.m. I asked her to disconnect the line. She refused, said we might need it someday. Now I'm wondering, was that man watching us?
Was he trying to warn me?
Or was he part of the network? Every question opened a dozen more, and every answer felt just out of reach. I still hadn't heard from her. The police wouldn't tell me where she was. They said she was being processed, that there was an ongoing federal investigation. The FBI was involved now, which meant whatever she'd gotten herself into had spiraled far beyond anything I imagined. But the most chilling part? Her face when they took her away. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even look surprised. She looked prepared, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. And that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant that she'd known this day would come. And she'd let me walk blindly into it anyway. But the truth is, the cops still haven't found everything. There are still unanswered questions. Still rooms they haven't searched. Still secrets she buried so deep in our lives that even now, I'm only beginning to uncover them. I don't know who she really is. I don't know what she's capable of. And I don't know if she'll ever tell the truth. But what I do know is that I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. You watching this right now, you might be sitting beside someone who's hiding everything from you. You might be living in a house full of ghosts, just like I was. And if you think you'd notice, think again. Because the deeper I dig, the more I realize I was never the main character in this story. I was just another part of her plan. The morning after the raid, I returned to the house once the cops finally cleared it, not because I was ready, but because I needed answers. Our front door had been completely shattered, half the furniture overturned, drawers yanked out like someone had been hunting for something specific. The silence was suffocating. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene, and maybe it always had been. I kept thinking if I'd just retraced her steps, looked through her things, found one hidden note or message, I could start putting the pieces together. I wasn't even sure what I was searching for, only that I had to find something before it vanished, like everything else. But when I checked the hollowed-out book where the fake passports had been, it was empty. The burner phone they confiscated? Gone, along with the laptop. No access, no backups, no trace of the files they told me were classified. They said I had to let the system do its job. But how can you trust a system that tears apart your life and then leaves you sitting in the ruins with no explanation? I reached out to a few people who knew her, old friends, acquaintances, even her former yoga instructor, who had always seemed overly interested in our relationship. Most of them dodged my calls. A few outright blocked me. But one woman finally agreed to meet me. Her name was Celia. She used to be close to my wife, apparently. They worked together at some nonprofit before we got married, though I'd only met her once, maybe twice. We met at a cafe downtown, and as soon as I walked in, I could tell something was off. She was nervous, eyes flicking to the door every few minutes, stirring her coffee long after the cream had settled. When I asked what she knew, she said something I'll never forget. You were never supposed to find out. You were the normal one. You were the cover. Then she stopped talking completely. She claimed she was being watched. She said there were people who didn't want me to dig deeper, people who had already disappeared, others who got too close. I thought she was being paranoid until I noticed the man across the street in the black SUV, parked for over an hour, never getting out. Just sitting there, watching. That night, someone slipped an envelope under my door. No return address. Inside was a single photo, me, standing in front of that warehouse she used to visit, the one I thought I'd followed her to unnoticed. On the back, written in block letters, it said, "You don't want to know what she was hiding." No signature. No explanation. Just a threat disguised as advice. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just looking for answers anymore.
I was being hunted by them.
Whoever she was involved with wasn't just powerful, they were watching every move I made.
They wanted me to stop.
But that only made me more determined. Because the minute someone tells you not to look, you realize there's something they're terrified you'll find. I went back to the warehouse in the middle of the night. I parked 2 blocks away, dressed in black, no phone, no GPS, nothing traceable. The back entrance still had the keypad, but someone had recently changed the lock. I stood there, unsure, until a man came around the corner with a flashlight. He wasn't a cop. His clothes were too clean, his demeanor too calm. I ducked behind a dumpster and watched as he punched in the new code effortlessly, walked in, and closed the door behind him. I didn't try to follow. Not then. But I knew now that the place wasn't abandoned. It wasn't forgotten. It was still active. And she had access. Back at the house, I started going through our old boxes, stuff we packed away after our last move, things that hadn't seen daylight in years. I figured if she was hiding things from me, maybe the trail started earlier than I thought. I found a photo album from her college years, one I'd never seen before. Tucked between the pages was an old newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline stopped me cold. Missing girl presumed dead in cold case vanishing. And there, in the grainy black and white photo, was a face that looked eerily like my wife. Different name, different haircut, but the same eyes. The same smile. At first, I told myself it was just a coincidence. A look-alike. But in the margin of the article, in her handwriting, were the words, "They'll never know what really happened." And my stomach dropped. I took the article to a private investigator, someone I found through a Reddit thread about cold cases. He looked at the image, ran a few background checks, and called me back a few days later with something I still can't explain. According to public records, the girl in the article did die, or, at least, was declared legally dead. But the PI found something else buried in the data, a change of name request filed 6 months later in a neighboring state, under a sealed court order. No other details. No reason. Just the request and the approval. And the new name? My wife's. Or at least the name I knew her by. I started questioning everything then. Who was she really? What happened to the life she left behind? Was I married to a missing person? Or worse, was she responsible for making someone else disappear? I confronted Celia again, but she refused to meet. Only texted me one line. "If you dig up her past, you won't survive what's buried with it." I haven't heard from her since. And just when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, I got a knock at the door. A man in a dark gray suit, no badge, no ID, just a briefcase and a neutral expression. He said he worked with a division of the government that didn't advertise itself. He claimed he was there to offer protection, that I was in over my head, that I needed to stop looking into her. When I asked why, he said, "Because sometimes the truth isn't just dangerous, it's classified." Then he left, without waiting for a response. I tried calling the number he gave me later that night. Disconnected. Now I don't know who to trust. Not the cops, not the people she once called friends, not even the random strangers warning me to keep quiet. I feel like I'm being pushed into a corner, surrounded by a puzzle with pieces that don't belong together. Every time I think I've found a lead, it vanishes. Every time I ask a question, someone makes sure I don't get an answer. And still, no one will tell me what happened in that warehouse. Or why she vanished for hours at a time. Or how a girl who supposedly died 20 years ago ended up in my house, sleeping beside me, whispering sweet nothings while hiding a life she didn't want me to ever discover. But here's the twist I didn't expect. Last night, I found something hidden in the attic, something that didn't belong to me. And the moment I touched it, I realized someone else had been living in my house the whole time. Someone I never saw. Someone she never told me about. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The thing I found in the attic, wedged deep between insulation and the wooden beam of the rafters, was a journal. Worn leather cover, pages aged with yellowing at the edges. It wasn't mine. It wasn't hers. But the name written inside the front cover in neat, slanted handwriting stopped my breath. Mira Avery. The last name matched the missing man the FBI kept asking about, Thomas Avery. Until that moment, I hadn't even considered that the name could have belonged to someone connected to him personally. A sister? A wife? The journal didn't say. But what it did contain was enough to make my skin crawl. Dozens of entries spanning 2 years. Mentions of late-night meetings. Codes. Hidden rooms. Talk of surveillance conditioning and domestic fronts. And over again, references to a woman who sounded exactly like my wife, but always under a different name. At least 5 aliases, each tied to a new town, a new identity, a new man. As I flipped through those pages in the dim attic light, a cold realization hit me. I wasn't her first. I wasn't even her third. I was just the latest in a line of carefully selected targets.
But why?
What was the purpose? Was she manipulating these men for money? For access? Was it part of some larger network? The more I read, the more the lines blurred between truth and madness. There were entries suggesting that Mira was being followed, that she had tried to warn someone before, but they vanished. One page simply read, "If this is found, it means she's done it again." Just as I was processing that, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. No voicemail, just a text. "You're not the only one. Ask Caleb." That name struck something in me immediately. Caleb was my younger brother. We hadn't spoken much in the last year, not after the falling out at Thanksgiving. He'd always said he didn't trust my wife. Said something about her rubbed him the wrong way. That she was too perfect and always watching. I chalked it up to sibling tension at the time. He'd had a rough year. Went through a divorce. Lost his job. Moved into a studio apartment in a sketchy part of town. We drifted. But now, suddenly, someone was connecting him to this twisted web, and I didn't know how or why. I called him immediately. It rang twice, then clicked to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. My stomach turned. I got in my car and drove to his place without thinking, barely even checking if I had gas. His building was dim, the hallway lights flickering in that way old horror movies always seem to exaggerate, except this was real. I knocked. No answer. I pounded harder. Still nothing. I found the superintendent, some old guy who reeked of menthols and skepticism, and paid him $50 to unlock the door. Inside, the apartment looked mostly untouched, but there was one thing that didn't sit right. The smell. Not blood. Not death.
But bleach.
The whole place had this sterile, scrubbed-to-the-bone feel. Like someone had come in recently and wiped it clean of everything. No laptop, no phone, no notes, no pictures. Even his toothbrush was gone. It was as if someone had staged the apartment for a fake move-out, but rushed it. Left behind half his shoes, a jacket still hanging by the door. And in the center of the coffee table, a single object that didn't belong there. A black USB drive with a small red, painted on the side. Like a signature. I took it home, scanned it for viruses, and opened the files. There were only 2 videos. The first was security cam footage, grainy, silent, black and white from what looked like a parking garage. It was time-stamped 4 weeks ago. The image showed my wife, or someone wearing her exact coat, meeting with a man who looked strikingly like Thomas Avery. They didn't touch. They didn't argue. They just stood there, facing each other, motionless for almost a full minute. And then she handed him something, a phone, maybe a flash drive. He looked at it, nodded, then turned and walked away. She stayed for another 5 minutes, pacing in small circles, before disappearing into a stairwell. The second video was shorter. It looked like it was filmed on a phone, shakier and more frantic. It was Caleb's voice, whispering rapidly, clearly hiding somewhere. The video didn't show his face, just a close-up of his knees and the corner of what looked like a storage room. If you're watching this, it means I'm already gone. I followed her. I know what she's doing. It's not just her. There's others. They're inside everything. Don't trust anyone. Especially not. And then a sound, like someone entering the room, cut the video off. Just blackness. No ending. No explanation. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it all. If Caleb was right, if this wasn't just about her but about a larger network, then what did they want? Why had she chosen me? And why was Caleb even involved in the first place? Had she gone after him before me? Was that what caused the rift between us? Did he know all along and try to warn me, only for me to push him away? And more importantly, if she had ties to Thomas Avery and he was supposedly missing, then who else had been pulled into this web? The question kept pounding at my brain like a drum. How many of us are there? And just when I thought the questions couldn't multiply any further, I got an email. No subject. No body. Just an attachment. A photograph. It was taken from a distance, possibly through a window. It showed me, just 2 nights ago, standing in the attic, holding Mira Avery's journal. meaning someone had been watching me the entire time, following my moves, tracking what I found. But that wasn't the worst part. In the background of the photo, just barely visible in the reflection of a broken attic mirror, was another face. My wife's. She was smiling. The timestamp on the photo said it was taken 5 hours after the police claimed she had been transferred to a federal facility out of state. By the end of that night, the walls of my house no longer felt like walls, they felt like surveillance equipment. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. Every shift of shadows through the blinds felt like a pair of eyes narrowing in on me. I hadn't left the house in over 24 hours, surviving off the stale leftovers in the fridge and whatever lukewarm coffee I could stomach. I kept the lights low and the curtains drawn, constantly checking my phone for strange activity, half expecting it to explode in my hand with some encrypted warning. The image from that email, of me holding the journal, with her smiling reflection behind me, looped in my mind like some cursed reel. It didn't just haunt me. It rewrote everything I thought I understood. If that photo was real, if it was taken hours after she was allegedly transported out of state, then one of two things had to be true. Either the federal agents were lying about where they took her, or she had never left at all. And that second possibility terrified me beyond words. I tried calling the lead investigator, who had been at the raid. His number was now disconnected. When I looked him up online, the department listing was gone. No digital trace, as if he'd never worked there. Every person tied to the investigation seemed to vanish. No return calls. No follow-up visits. Just silence. As if the entire system had been reset after extracting what they needed, and I was left behind in the wreckage. I couldn't tell if that meant I was no longer useful to them, or if I was now a liability. Either way, it meant I was alone. But I wasn't. Not entirely. Around midnight, I saw a car parked across the street, engine off, headlights off. At first, I told myself it was nothing, a neighbor's guest, a lost Uber. But it was still there an hour later. Then another hour. I peeked through the slats of the blinds, heart pounding in my chest, when I saw the flash of a cigarette light up from the driver's seat. The faint orange glow illuminated part of a face, masculine, weathered, hard, but only for a split second before disappearing again. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I'd been tangled in an investigation that now no longer existed? That my wife might be a ghost from a dead woman's past, and that I was being watched by men who didn't even show up in public records? I felt like I'd slipped through the cracks of reality and was now living in the spaces in between, where nothing made sense and no help was coming. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife tucked under my leg, trying not to let my panic take over. That's when the doorbell rang. Just once. A single, calm chime that shattered the silence like a gunshot. I froze. The bell didn't ring again. I waited, barely breathing. After what felt like a full minute, I tiptoed to the peephole. No one was there. I unlocked the door just enough to open it an inch and peered out. Still nothing. But when I looked down, I saw the envelope. No markings, no stamps. Just a thick manila envelope with my name written across it in bold, capital letters. I brought it inside with trembling hands, locked the door behind me, and pulled on gloves from the bathroom cabinet, like it would somehow protect me from what I was about to find. Inside were photographs.
Dozens of them.
Some of me. Some of my brother Caleb. Others of people I didn't recognize, but they all had one thing in common. My wife was in every single frame. Sometimes in the background, sometimes front and center, always watching, always smiling. And in one of the final photos, taken in what looked like a hospital room, she was standing next to a man strapped to a bed. His face was bruised, nearly unrecognizable, but something in his eyes told me it might have been Caleb. Alive, but clearly not well. And the timestamp? Just 3 days ago. I lost it. I screamed, slammed my fist into the wall so hard I cracked the plaster. My heart was thudding so violently, I thought it would burst. This wasn't just some twisted web of secrets anymore. This was something far more dangerous, far more deliberate. They had him. Or they had someone they wanted me to think was him. Either way, it was bait. And I was the one being pulled in, step by step, with every clue laid out just enough to spark hope, but never enough to provide answers. I tried to reach out to the private investigator, the one who traced the name change linked to Mira Avery. His number rang twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. A chill ran down my spine. I opened my email and found one new message from a burner account. The subject line simply read, "You were warned." There was no text. Just another attachment. A picture of the PI's office, door kicked in, files everywhere, blood smears on the floor. The timestamp was from 2 hours ago, the same time I was holding those photos. I knew then that I wasn't just being watched. I was being herded. Someone was deciding what I found, when I found it, and how long I'd be allowed to stay alive after discovering it. My paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore, it was strategy. And suddenly, I began questioning everything again. What if Caleb wasn't the only one she had her claws in? What if the person who gave me that USB, the man in the cafe, even Celia, what if they were all part of the same game? What if she wasn't hiding from me anymore, but orchestrating the entire thing from behind the scenes? Because somehow, no matter how much I dug, I was never ahead of her. Not once. She was always one step ahead, always prepared, always smiling in the reflection, just out of reach. And then the phone rang. Not my cell. The old landline I had nearly forgotten even existed, the one she refused to disconnect. I let it ring once.
Twice.
3 times. And then I picked up, heart in my throat, unsure if I could even speak. But before I could say a word, her voice came through.
Soft.
Familiar. Almost gentle. "I told you not to look," she said. Then the line went dead. I stared at the dead phone in my hand for what felt like an hour, her voice still echoing in my ears like a siren from a distant shore, soft, measured, and terrifying in its calm. "I told you not to look." It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was something worse. It was a promise fulfilled. The kind of line someone delivers when they know you've already stepped too far into something you can't escape. My hands were shaking as I set the phone back into the cradle, still trying to process how she could have called me from nowhere. The landline wasn't even listed. And yet she knew. She always knew. Every time I thought I was piecing things together, she was already holding the full puzzle in her lap, smiling. I couldn't sleep that night, not with her voice cutting through my thoughts, not with the image of my brother in that hospital room, not with the photos, the surveillance, the burned-out contacts. Everything had unraveled so quickly, and yet none of it made sense. Not fully. Something still didn't add up, and that, more than anything, kept me awake until morning. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I needed to retrace everything from the beginning. Not the recent stuff. Not the warehouse, not the journal, not even the investigators. I needed to go all the way back, to when I first met her. Because what if this story hadn't started when I thought it did? What if the mystery didn't begin with the cops breaking into our home, or with that strange photo of Mira Avery? What if it had been there all along, hiding in plain sight? I went into the basement and pulled out a dusty box of old photos, mementos from our early dating days, things I hadn't looked at in years. Most of it was what you'd expect. Receipts from our first trip, a ticket stub from the horror movie she pretended to hate, the birthday card she made from scratch. But then I found something odd. A small photo tucked behind an old recipe book, one I had never seen before. It showed her standing in front of a cabin. The kind you'd find deep in the Smoky Mountains. The timestamp said it was taken 6 months before we met. Written on the back, in her handwriting, were 2 words: test location. I didn't understand. A test for what? I didn't remember her ever mentioning a cabin or a trip that far south. I Googled the coordinates printed in tiny font along the bottom of the photo, probably a feature from whatever camera had taken it. It took me to a secluded patch of forest in Tennessee, several miles from any town. No roads led directly to it. No listings, no records, no mention of it in any tourism logs or rental sites. It wasn't just off the grid. It was hidden. And suddenly, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about secrets. This was about control, planning, structure. And if she had been to that place before she ever met me, Maybe it had something to do with how we met in the first place. Then the next twist hit. I called my mother. We hadn't spoken much since the fallout of everything, mostly because she never fully trusted my wife from the beginning. She used to say things like, something in her eyes doesn't match her smile. I'd brushed it off back then, chalked it up to old-fashioned overprotection. But when I told her about the photo, her voice changed immediately. She grew quiet, then asked if the cabin looked like it had stone siding, a green tin roof, and one crooked window near the second floor. I froze. Because it did. I asked her how she knew, and after a long pause, she told me something that made my blood run cold. She'd been there. Years ago. Long before I met my wife. It was a place used, she said carefully, for rehabilitation programs, off-the-books psychological testing done on people recovering from trauma. A friend of hers had gone through something there. She didn't know who ran it, but everyone who went either came back different or didn't come back at all. I tried to make sense of that information, but it didn't fit the narrative I had been building. My wife wasn't some ghost from a tragic facility. She was calculated, efficient, confident. Not a patient. But then, another memory surfaced, one I had buried. During the early days of our relationship, maybe 2 months in, I remembered waking up one night to her standing by the window, whispering something to herself. I had asked her what she was saying, and she brushed it off, told me I must have been dreaming. But now I wondered, what if that wasn't just a dream? What if that moment was a crack in the mask? That same day, I got another message. This time through an anonymous email. Just 4 words. She was the study. Attached was a document, an old, scanned form that looked like it had been stolen from a medical archive. At the top, in bold red ink, it said Subject 4C, 13. Behavioral manipulation. Observation period, 42 months. And under Observer Contact, my name was listed. Not hers.
Mine.
For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my entire identity unraveling in real time. What did that mean? Was I part of an experiment? Was I the one being tested? Or was our entire relationship, our house, our marriage, even a raid, a controlled event? Was she observing me, or was I observing her and just didn't know it? And who was running the program? The feds who vanished? The people in the SUV? The ones with the cameras? Or someone else entirely, someone above all of them, still watching, still taking notes? I thought I had been chasing her secret. But now I realized, maybe she had been chasing mine. And then, as if to confirm the spiral I was falling into wasn't just in my head, the power in the house went out. No wind. No storm. No grid alert. Just complete blackness. My phone flickered, then went dead. And in the reflection of the darkened screen, I saw movement behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. Only a handwritten note lying on the floor that hadn't been there moments before. It read, "Welcome to Phase 2. The lights didn't come back on. Not that night. Not even the next morning. My neighborhood was still powered, still bright, still normal, everyone's porch lamps glowing softly in the dawn haze, cars humming by like nothing had changed. But my house stayed dark. My devices remained useless, as if something had silently overridden their circuitry. No matter how many times I flipped breakers, reset routers, swapped batteries, nothing worked. That kind of silence changes a person. You don't realize how much you depend on the hum of technology until it's all gone and you're left alone with your thoughts and the shadows around you. I sat in the kitchen for hours with nothing but a dying flashlight and that note still clutched in my hand. Welcome to Phase 2. That wasn't just a threat. That was a reset. A shift. Whatever game I had been caught in had just turned a corner, and now I wasn't just chasing clues. I was being given instructions. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was survival. But as I packed a small bag and tried to figure out where to go next, I got a knock at the back door. Not the front. The back. A place only people who'd been in the house before would think to use. I reached for the kitchen knife again and inched toward the door, every muscle in my body screaming. When I pulled the curtain back, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my mother, her face pale, her expression stiff, her hands trembling at her sides. She came in slowly, looked around at the dark kitchen, and without saying a word, pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket and handed it to me. "They contacted me," she whispered, her voice brittle. "They said if you don't stop, they'll take me next." I stared at the paper. It was another document, similar to the behavioral file I'd found online, but this one had my mother's name on it. Subject 7B, 21. Observation status. Passive embedded. The dates went back over a decade. I dropped into a chair, unable to breathe properly, the air suddenly too thick for my lungs. Asked her if she knew what this was, if she had any idea what part she played in this. She started crying, not sobbing, just these slow, painful tears that looked like they came from years of holding something in. "I didn't know everything," she said. "Not at first. They told me it was for your protection. They told me to say yes." I demanded she explain. Who were they?
What were they protecting me from?
But all she could say was that it started when I was a teenager, after the accident. I hadn't thought about that night in years. A car crash I was in with my father. I walked away with a concussion. He didn't walk away at all. I had always believed it was just a horrible tragedy. Nothing more. But now she was telling me that men in suits came to the hospital afterward. That they asked her to sign non-disclosure forms, told her I had a rare neurological pattern that made me uniquely compatible with something they were building. She never asked what.
She just wanted me to be safe.
And for years she watched, reported, gently nudged me toward choices, relationships, environments. Including, it turns out, the one that led me straight to my wife. And suddenly it clicked. The whole picture cracked open like a pane of glass under pressure. She wasn't some rogue operative on the run. She wasn't the mystery. I was. My whole life had been engineered from the inside out. My childhood, my trauma, my healing, my marriage. All of it part of a design I never saw coming. And now that I was finally beginning to see it, they were trying to shut it down before I dug too deep. My mother begged me to walk away. She said if I kept pushing, they would come for the people I cared about, the ones who didn't agree to be part of the experiment but were folded in anyway, my friends, my coworkers, even strangers I'd interacted with. Collateral damage. She said they had done it before. To others. That's when she gave me the real ultimatum. She told me she had been offered a way out, a final severance from the program, one that would erase her data and disconnect her from the network entirely. But the condition was brutal. I had to agree to stop everything. No more investigating. No more calls. No more questions. If I signed the form they'd already sent to her, we'd both walk away clean. They'd leave me alone. They'd even make the entire mess disappear. Caleb's disappearance. The house raid. The footage. All of it would be rewritten as a mental breakdown. I'd be declared unstable, quietly placed under a psychiatric care order for 6 months, and then reintegrated with a new identity. Safe. Untouched. Like none of it ever happened. It was the most impossible choice I'd ever been handed. Sign the form, lose the truth, but gain peace. Or refuse it, and risk not only my life, but everyone else's who had been dragged into this nightmare. I stared at that form for what felt like hours, the text blurring with every breath. It was official. Government marked. Redacted in places that screamed danger. And somewhere in the back of my head, I could hear her voice again, my wife's voice from the landline, telling me I should have never looked. But I had. And now I couldn't unsee it. So I did the only thing I could do. I burned the form. My mother watched with tears streaming down her face, and I told her I was sorry. That I loved her. That I wished she had told me sooner. She didn't say a word. She just walked out of the house without looking back, and I haven't seen her since. And now I know there's no turning back. I know I've just declared war on something I don't even fully understand yet. I don't know where Caleb is. I don't know who else is still part of this. But I do know one thing for sure. If I was their test subject, then this ends with me, one way or another. I didn't drive straight to the cabin. I took the long route through back roads and half-abandoned towns, stopping to refuel where no cameras could follow and where no strangers stared for too long. Every turn of the steering wheel felt like I was dragging the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions behind me. The photograph. The voice on the phone. Caleb's disappearance. The silent SUV still parked across my street every other night. My mother's confession. The program. The note. All of it had pushed me toward this place, toward the one location that had appeared over and over again in the documents, the journal, and the surveillance footage. Deep in the Smoky Mountains, hidden behind false maps and overgrown trails, the cabin finally appeared before me like a wound in the forest, untouched by time, quietly pulsing with secrets. The front door creaked open without resistance. Inside, the air was stale but not abandoned. There was no dust. No cobwebs. The floor had been swept recently. Someone had been keeping it ready, like they were expecting me. I stepped carefully into the main room, where a single light bulb buzzed overhead from a small gas-powered generator. The walls were lined with corkboards and taped-up notes, every inch covered in photographs, maps, documents, all arranged with surgical precision. And at the center, pinned with a red thumbtack, was my face. Underneath, written in heavy marker, termination window closed. Proceed to Phase 3. I turned, heart racing, ready for anything, but not for who was standing in the doorway behind me. It was her. Not some distorted memory of her, not a doppelganger, not a hallucination. My wife. Same eyes, same posture, same disarming calm. She didn't flinch when I stepped back. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me, almost gently, like she pitied me. I didn't think you'd make it this far, she finally said. They said you wouldn't. Her voice wasn't cold. It was tired, almost sad. I demanded answers. Everyone I had buried for weeks now. Who was she really? What was this program? Why Caleb? Why my mother? Why me? She walked slowly to the wall and pulled down a folder I hadn't noticed before. It was thicker than the others, sealed in a plastic case. She placed it on the table between us and flipped it open. You were the key variable, she said. The only one they couldn't replicate. Everyone else failed after exposure. But you adapted. I stared down at the first page. My name, my photo, followed by psychological profiles and behavioral logs that went back longer than I had been married. One page dated back to my early childhood. Entries from therapists I barely remembered, notes I never saw. This wasn't about me, she said quietly.
It was always about you.
I was assigned to observe, guide, and eventually terminate the cycle. But then, she trailed off. But then what? I asked, my voice cracking from the pressure of everything around me. She hesitated, then looked up, tears barely visible in the corners of her eyes. But then I started to believe it, she whispered. The life we built. The man you were. The way you fought for people, for truth. I wasn't supposed to care, but I did. She looked away like she couldn't face me anymore. And that made me dangerous. It hit me then, like ice shattering in my chest. This wasn't just a psychological operation. It was a long-term conditioning program. One designed to simulate a full life in a controlled environment to monitor how someone like me would evolve under pressure, betrayal, and manipulation. My father's accident, Caleb's fall, even the timing of our marriage. Every major event had been curated. Some real, some artificially induced. And I had passed every threshold, every stress test, unknowingly proving their theories. Until I stopped playing along. Until I looked too closely. Until I remembered too much. Asked her if Caleb was alive. She nodded, slowly. He found out ahead of schedule. He wasn't supposed to. So they isolated him. But he's not gone. Where is he? I demanded. But before she could answer, the lights cut off. The room fell into blackness. Somewhere outside, an engine rumbled. The generator died. And then a voice, distorted and deep, came through a speaker hidden in the ceiling. Subject 4C, 13 has breached parameters. Asset 9F has compromised the protocol. Proceed with contingency. She grabbed my hand, suddenly panicked. They're here, she said. They know I told you. We have minutes, maybe less. She pulled open a trapdoor beneath the kitchen table, revealing a tunnel sloped into the earth.
Go now.
Find Caleb. Finish what they started. or burn it all down. But I didn't move.
Not yet.
I looked at her one last time, every muscle screaming at me to run. Why are you helping me? I asked, breathless, aching, drowning in doubt.
She didn't hesitate this time.
Because I was never just observing you. I was waiting for you to wake up. Then she shoved the folder into my hands, pushed me through the trapdoor, and slammed it shut behind me just as the cabin doors burst open with booted footsteps and the electric buzz of tasers powering up. I ran through the darkness, following the narrow tunnel until it opened into the woods behind the mountain. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran until the trees blurred and my lungs felt like they'd collapse. But just before I disappeared into the trees, I heard something echo from behind me. One final explosion, loud and sharp, as the cabin went up in fire. And just when I thought I was free, when I thought I'd escaped the game and that nothing could surprise me anymore, I reached into the folder she gave me, flipped past the last page of my file, and found another one. A file dated 10 years in the future. It had my name, but under occupation, it didn't say test subject. It said lead architect. It took months before I could breathe without fear, before I could hear the quiet without expecting it to be broken by a knock at the door, a call with no ID, or the low hum of an engine parked just a little too long outside. I moved 3 times in the first 6 weeks, lived under aliases that didn't quite fit me, slept in motels with the curtains drawn tight, and a burner phone always within reach. The folder, the one she shoved into my hands before the cabin exploded, became both my compass and my curse. It held answers I didn't want but needed, truths so carefully buried they were almost invisible unless you knew how to look. Inside, beyond the behavioral data, beyond the test results and surveillance logs, was the final revelation, the list of subjects. Not names, not photos, but IDs.
Hundreds of them.
Some terminated, some still active, and one entry labeled founder. My ID was listed directly beneath it, and next to my ID was a note scribbled in the margin, a different ink than the others. For words, you were always meant to return. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that someone had doctored the file to disorient me, to mess with my head one last time. But the deeper I dug, the more undeniable it became. The conditioning program hadn't just been following me. It had originated from me. From a version of me I had no memory of. I uncovered archived footage, security cam clips, transcripts from internal communications, even voice recordings, and in one of them, clear as day, I heard my own voice, older, colder, explaining the foundational concept of the test environments. To truly understand free will, the voice said, we must manipulate the illusion of choice, then measure who breaks it.
It didn't sound like me.
But it was me. Or some earlier version, scrubbed and reprogrammed, then dropped back into the system as a fresh participant. They had built the entire simulation on my original theories. And when I began to question the system I had created, they reset me. Started the cycle over. The implications shattered everything I thought I understood about morality, about identity, about consent. I hadn't just been a victim. I had been a designer. And the people I loved, the ones I lost, the ones I failed, had been collateral in my own experiment.
How do you live with something like that?
How do you reconcile loving someone who is placed in your life as part of your own algorithm? I found Caleb eventually. Not in a hospital, not locked away, but in another test site disguised as a rehab center for non-compliant deviants. He was barely himself. Tired. Distrustful. But alive. When I told him the truth, that I might have been behind everything that happened to us, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked, "Do you remember being that person?" I said no. He said, "Then maybe you're not him anymore." We disappeared together after that. Took what we knew, burned what we didn't, and vanished off the grid. We started building something in the desert, something small and off the map. No phones. No tech. Just space. Quiet. A place where no one's decisions were being watched, calculated, or redirected. We even found a few others who had escaped, survivors from different branches of the same program, all carrying the same scars. Some blamed me. Some didn't. I didn't argue either way. I just kept going. It wasn't redemption, but it was motion. And sometimes that's all you have left. As for her, my wife, my handler, my mirror, I never saw her again. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right or a strange face lingers too long in a gas station, I wonder if she's still watching. If she survived the fire. If she's still part of the program. Or if, like me, she finally broke free. And maybe, just maybe, she's building her own kind of peace somewhere, trying to make sense of a life shaped by lies but still touched by something real. I don't know if the program still exists. I don't know how many cycles are still running or how many others are out there, unknowingly living inside something they didn't choose. But I do know this. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you step beyond the edge of the illusion, the world never looks the same again. And maybe that's the real experiment. Not the data, not the reactions, not the psychological thresholds. But what we do when we finally understand who we really are. Whether we rebuild, or disappear, or walk away quietly into the unknown. So if you're still watching this, if you made it all the way through, maybe you're wondering how much of your life is yours. Maybe you're asking yourself what you've ignored, what you've accepted without question, what choices you thought were yours but never truly were. That's not paranoia. That's awareness. And maybe that's the first step. Maybe the real test isn't over. Not yet. Because sometimes the program doesn't end. It just waits until you're ready to wake up.